Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Fat Free Economics. I'm starting a little bit later than I'd hoped. It's almost 5 p.m. here in California, and I usually like to do these Sunday broadcasts around 3 o'clock. So sorry about that. But, life happens, and it took me a little bit longer to kind of do my research and collect my thoughts about what I wanted to say about the labor shortage that's happening right now in this country. And it's a complex topic. It's not quite as simple or black and white as the media likes to portray it. They always want a good guy and a bad guy. It's this guy's fault, it's their fault. But in economics, there are no white hats and black hats. I think we all understand that. There's simply a lot of actors and resources interacting in the economy to produce the situation where we're at right now. So this talk is going to be about teasing out what's happening with the labor shortage, right? And what we're calling the labor shortage is probably a more complex phenomenon. But don't worry, we're going to get through all that. Uh, and I think calling it a labor shortage is actually a little bit too simplistic, right? There's a lot of factors that are going into this, but specifically, we're going to talk about, both the long-term and short-term factors that are contributing to our current situation. I call it the current situation because, the labor shortage is obviously related to a lot of other things that are happening in the economy and also the pandemic. So, just to explain, my channel is about examining the economic news of the day and taking out the spin, taking out the bias, grounding our discussion in solid economic theory, solid understanding of micro and macroeconomics, so that you, the public, the audience, can have a calm, rational understanding of what's happening in the economy, because there's just too many clickbait headlines out there right now, right? It's a very emotional subject as we come out of the pandemic and the lockdown. And so we need to have some clarity and rationality in how we think about this. And my channel is devoted to that. Now, I just started this channel, and in my previous live stream, I forgot to mention my credentials because, not to hit you over the head with them, but I do think that it's important for you to know. So, I have an economics degree from Cornell University. I have an MBA where I specialized in entrepreneurship and finance at the University of California, Irvine. And I've been an economist for over 15 years now, studying various aspects of the economy. And I don't portray myself as an expert in all aspects of the economy, but certainly I can help you rationally and calmly interpret the economic news and do the proper research to place the economic data in the proper context. So, with that said, let's get into the topic. I see that my headphones are always a little bit askew. It looks a little bit awkward, but anyways, let's get into uh, the whole labor shortage discussion. And I want to start with an article where um, you'll see. Let me share my screen with you, real quick. Um, okay. Sorry, I'm still getting used to all this, okay, so we are looking at an article where the Minneapolis Federal Reserve President Neel Kashkari on Friday said he thinks millions of American workers on the sidelines will return to the labor market and cool inflationary pressures, right? So let's decode this comment for a little bit because it's actually a little bit confusing, right? I get his point that workers are wanting to return to the labor market. We all need to make a living, that's clear. But with regards to his remarks about inflation, it's a little bit unclear because, uh, we had a previous discussion in the previous live stream where I broke down the factors of what causes inflation: aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And what we know about workers returning to the workplace is that they are both a source of production and also a source of demand, right? So both aggregate and supply and aggregate demand should increase. And so I'm not quite clear on why the mere fact of many workers returning to the workforce, which is clearly a good thing, right? But why that fact by itself would ease inflationary pressures. Because, like I said, demand is going to go up and supply hopefully is going to go up. So he may be talking about the fact that, as workers return to the economy, some of the logistics and manufacturing problems that we're having right now may ease, and in the sense that if there is a labor shortage, and we'll get into that, we'll get into that, and why that might actually be a mislabeling of what's happening right now. But if there is a shortage of workers right now, maybe people returning will ease those supply problems and therefore will moderate inflation. Now, I'm sure that he knows about the economy. I'm not disparaging in any way his knowledge. I just think that his that particular sentence, which I don't know, may have been taken out of context, and maybe there's more explanations behind that, or that comment was made in the context of some other things that are happening. But in any case, what he's saying here is that there are about, let's call it 9 million people who are still out of work. That is a tragic figure that we need to address as economists and as policy makers, and not myself. I work for the government, but I'm not a policymaker. But I'm talking about we as a country need to address that's very serious problem, right? But he does say that he believes that workers are coming back, and he does go on further to say that inflation pressures are easing. And I mentioned in the last podcast that oh, sorry, let me increase the screen so you can see it better. That I do expect inflation to ease in the short term, and he's really hitting on some of the same points that I made, which is that the data is showing that some of the pressures are already starting to ease. For example, he's citing that lumber prices are starting to, as he said, quote, are falling back to earth. We would expect to see more of these very high readings start to return back down to normal, right? Now, he talks about how the Federal Reserve was watching the economy in the previous expansion, prior to the pandemic, and they saw workers come off the sidelines year after year, right? And here's one of the key points that we really need to discuss, which is, quote, he's saying, quote, when wages started to climb a little bit, people came off the sidelines, eventually driving the unemployment rate down to 3.5%, a 50-year low. So let's talk about that, right? He's making a very good point as an economist that, no matter the situation, no matter whether there's a pandemic or a lockdown, well, the lockdown is a serious thing. I mean, that has an effect, but there is always the factors of the supply and demand curve, which also applies to the supply of labor, right? And so that doesn't go away. The economy has its ups and downs. There are, major events, that happen along the way, but the interaction of supply and demand is always a constant presence. And he's actually suggesting that in the previous years, right, even though the Federal Reserve had thought that, with labor force participation being high, that the economy might be running out of workers. Does that sound familiar? That we're running out of workers, but they continue to come off the sidelines. And why is that? As he says in his article, when wages started to climb a little bit, people came off the sideline. So um, that statement is simply a reflection of the supply and demand curves for labor, right? They started to offer a little bit more money, you know. Um, excuse me, I was supposed to show this banner here. I'm still new to this whole, you know, streaming thing. So he's saying in the previous times when wages went up a little bit, people did start to come off the sidelines, right? And further, he's talking about when and how he expects the, um, you know, uh, the economy to get back on track because he's talking about several factors at play holding back workers from returning to the labor market. And he's talking about childcare. That seems to be a huge issue right now. Continued nervousness about the coronavirus pandemic, understandable, and generous unemployment benefits, right? But as he says, quote, all three factors are holding back labor supply, but by September, all three of these factors should really be better. And then we should see more labor supply in the fall, right? So uh, we talked before in the previous broadcast about the coronavirus pandemic and how the vaccine is easing the concerns of that. We also discussed in the context of inflation how unemployment benefits, you know, the impact of unemployment benefits in restraining the motivation for job seekers is still being debated, right? It's not that people are saying, or that economists are saying that, you know, that there is no impact, but there is an ongoing debate, and you know, they're looking at the data and saying exactly how much uh, impact does that have, right? Because there's actually been conflicting signals in the job data so far. But that those kind of stuff tend to ease as time goes by and a few months pass or maybe a year pass, and we're better able to reflect on what exactly happened. So I'm sure that question will be the study of multiple PhD students in economic departments across the country, and there'll be lots of good papers written about that. But in any case, he's making the point that with the pandemic starting to ease, cases are coming down dramatically, and then with unemployment benefits that are set to expire, or in some states have already expired, whether or not they're having major impact or having a more moderate impact, the fact remains they are set to fade away, right? So by September, he's saying, um, all these factors. I don't know about childcare. You know, I think there we have a chicken and egg problem of people wanting to return to work, but they're afraid, and therefore, I mean, childcare workers are also probably just as concerned about the current economy and the pandemic, as everyone else, right? So um, here's the other point that he made, you know, and this is kind of a typical reaction that an economist would have, when people, excuse me, it's hot outside today, you know, um, you know, but this is the typical reaction that an economist would have when somebody like a business executive starts talking about a labor shortage, right? So let's look at his comments, and I want to say that after we read his comments, we're going to contextualize it. We're going to go further in depth and look at some real weight data, right? And we'll dig deeper into exactly what he's saying here. Okay, so let's take a look at his comments. Um, for years, Kashkari has bristled whenever businesses complain about a lack of workers. He's urged executives to raise wages to attract workers, calling it basic economics. But executives have until recently seemed reluctant to take that step. Okay, that is a key factor or a key point to make not only in terms of what he's saying, but what he's saying about the reluctance of executives. And I'm going to go into a detailed breakdown of what I think is happening there. In fact, I'm quite sure this is what's happening, right? So again, place proper context on the economic news, interpret the news on the basis of sound economic theory. Okay, so he's making an additional statement and saying, oh, excuse me, and let me get rid of this thing. I don't know why businesses have this emotional view about wages, but they do. Well, you know what? I have an inkling as to why they are actually having this emotional uh, view or emotional attachment about this wage issue. Okay, and I'm going to say that it's not about executives or businesses being the enemy. It's not about them being, heartless, greedy minions of the corporate of corporations. Okay, there's something deeper that's happening right now, and we need to understand that before we start to demonize each other. Right. So let's step out of that kind of talk. Right. And I'm going to okay, let me just show you one real quick. It's a chart which is showing the trend um, of real wages for workers going back to 1965. Okay, so let's talk about this. Okay, so the red line uh, the red line is what you need to focus upon. Okay, where the caption shows U.S. real average, U.S. real average hourly wage read in constant 2017 dollars for private sector production and non-supervisory workers. Okay, we're not talking about executives here because that's a separate animal to analyze, but we're talking about this red line right here. Okay. So let's break it down. Okay. So something that is very easy for the public to understand is dollars per hour. This is how much workers are being paid in terms of dollars per hour. And what jumps out at you when you look at this chart right here? Well, initially starts in 1965, a little bit above. Let's call it around $6 per hour. It starts to climb up to, I'm gonna guess, maybe $16, $17 an hour. It starts to go down, and there is a dramatic downward slope up until 1995 of real wages, and then it starts to climb back up again. So we're up to maybe maybe $13 an hour. So one thing to note is from around 1973 all the way down to 1995, right? Because of the impact of inflation and whatever other factors that are there, it means that even if you were paid the exact number of dollars, okay, excuse me, I'm supposed to show the banner here. Even if you were paid the same, number of dollars, what economists call the nominal wages, right? Nominal as in it's not really adjusted for inflation. Even if the number of dollars you're paid stay the same, you are losing money. Your wages were actually going down. And by going down, we're talking about the purchasing power, what you were actually able to buy with those same dollars, which wasn't reduced, but the purchasing power was reduced, right? And in that sense, a salary cut, right? No one's happy about that. I mean, were you ever happy about taking a salary cut? No one ever said, hey, you know what? I want somebody to cut my salary because that would make me really happy. Has anyone ever said that? I don't think so. So looking at this chart here, right? Let's look again. So for a long time, and then, okay, yeah. So sorry. So for a long time, it was on a downward trend. Then 1995, it went back. It started to creep back up, right? And right now, it's at, let's call it 13. $13 an hour, but it still didn't meet the peak of, let's say, 1973, where it was around 16, maybe $17 an hour. So all this time has passed from 1973 to, I don't know, it must be 2018. I think, yeah, this is trended up to 2018. If you start here at the peak and you go down to 1918, you know what? What this means is that people were paid best in 1972, 73, and since then it's been a downward slide. Is it any wonder that people are feeling squeezed? Is it any wonder that so much of the politics in this country has revolved around the middle class and their welfare, and how so much. And again, we are not going to get into politics at all in this channel, but I'm talking about the economic impacts. And there's a real political consequence to having your wages fall. Really, I mean, the ups and downs, yes, but a long-term trend to fall for so long, for decades, right? Have you yourself felt in your position, in your job, in your life, that somehow you're running as hard as you can, but somehow you just feel like you're still falling a little bit behind, or maybe more than a little bit, right? If you've had that feeling for years, it's not an illusion. It's real. It's really happening. And of course, we're not talking about, people who have made millions over the course of their of the same years, or we're talking about the majority of the vast majority of the people in this country have felt their wages at a standstill, and a lot of them have actually experienced a downward slide. Okay, now believe me or not, we're going to get even further into a breakdown on this chart and what that really means. We're going to break this data down further, but you can see the wider policy implication and how that might relate to our current situation with the lockdown and the pandemic. Okay. So let's go on. Let's go on, and I want to talk about the current situation in a little bit more detail, which is particularly, this is a Vox article about the current labor shortage. And so let me share that screen with you. Okay. And this article is also talking about retail workers who have faced low pay and tough conditions for years. Okay. The pandemic made it worse. Okay. That's kind of along the lines of where I'm going with this. I think you can see that. Now, this is not the full point that I want to make, but this is the next stop along the way of our journey. And it's no controversial statement, to say that the pandemic has made things worse for a lot of people, right? If you're teleworking, for example, like I'm working from home full time. It hasn't been as much a concern, right? And I'm working with databases and logging on to terminals and doing economic analysis and stuff. And so I'm here at home. So it's been easier on me. I acknowledge that, but for example, for retail workers or people who have to work out in the public and meet with people as an intrinsic necessary part of their job, it's a different story. I think we all acknowledge that, right? And also, I understand, some people might consider Vox to be, uh, a liberal paper, but we're not getting into that. Okay, I'm talking about the specifics of this article and the points that are making, which uh, are in congruence with some of the other economic data that we're seeing right now. I mean, look at um, the thing that I was saying about real wages. Okay, the fact that they have been in a strict band, right? Um, over the course of decades since 1973. Now, if you're wondering about this gray line, remember how I was saying that um, there's a difference between the dollars that you get paid and your actual purchasing power. So this gray line is nominal dollars. So uh, this chart is informative because it's showing you that, yeah, you might be getting paid more actual dollars. Maybe they weren't frozen. The companies continue to increase your wages over time, but when you factor in inflation and the loss of purchasing power, you see that the reality is different from what you might think. I mean, in nominal dollars, it seems like your wages are constantly going up, but of course, no, that's not the whole story. That's not the real story, right? And so that this title really kind of makes the point that a lot of retail workers and people who were, uh, you know, um, how to say, in the lower um, income bracket, people, lower paying jobs, have suffered from this trend of declining real wages for many years now. Okay, and the article notes that, okay, in 2017, the typical pay for full-time workers in the sector was less than $33,000 a year, not enough to live in many places. So then you got the unpredictable schedules that we know about retail work, right? How they're on call all the time, and they feel like their time is very unpredictable. They have difficulty arranging for childcare. Well, didn't we mention childcare in that other article where the Fed president was talking about childcare as a major restraint to people entering the workplace? Well, think how much worse it is for retail people who have no predictability in their schedule, right? Um, and also the whole point about most people making less than $30,000. Now, I don't know where you live, but I can tell you here in LA, here in California, $30,000 doesn't go very far, especially when you factor in the cost of housing. You know, so excuse me. Um, so here's the thing. Um, workers right now, because of the pandemic, um, when this article notes that the pandemic has made it worse, okay, we're not simply talking about the current situation. When it says made things worse, we're talking about the real wage situation that has been going on for the last I don't know, 40, 50 years. You know, you saw you know, this chart, right? This is the pandemic has highlighted the challenge and the difficulty faced by many people who are experiencing this, what I would say in the long term, stagnating wages, right? And so now you've got the pandemic going on, and people are not dumb, okay? People are not dumb. You don't need a PhD to understand that life is difficult for many people right now, okay? And so, not, being not dumb, they are making rational calculations. And what calculation is that? Let's talk about this. Calculating risk and reward. Okay. Now, this is a definition that applies toward investing. Okay. This is about, how you would invest money in the stock market and all this stuff. But in a very real sense, it also applies to, your work. You're working, and you have to calculate. So, um, the actual calculation to determine risk versus reward is very easy. You simply divide your net profit, the reward, by the price of your maximum risk. Okay. Well, in the situation of working for a living, what is your net profit? Well, the salary that you're paid, right? The salary that for many years now has faced inflationary pressures and has experienced a decrease in purchasing power, right? So normally your net profit, the reward, has in a nominal sense, in nominal dollars, has been going up, but in terms of real wages, it has not, it has not been going up all that much. In fact, long term for many people, it has stagnated, right? So the risk side of this equation of going to work hasn't increased. The benefit hasn't gone up all that much. In fact, it's gone down. You know, and then what is the denominator? The price of the maximum risk, right? Well, there's a pandemic. Yeah, I mean, we all were in lockdown, but the people who worked in grocery stores, worked in restaurants, trying to earn a living, I mean, they've had no choice. They still had to leave their home and take additional risk and deal with, a lot of people screaming about their mask policy, social distancing, irate customers. You've all seen the headlines, right? And I'm not saying that, small those minority incidents are the rule, but come on, it's been difficult for grocery workers and a lot of retail jobs out there, right? So people are making rational risk reward choices about how they're going to re-enter the economy, right? And to get back into the workforce, because again, we all need to make a living, right? And so when you think about here, let me say, I want to. There's another chart that I wanted to. Want to show you. Okay, here we go. So this is research done. This is from the Pew Research Center, and the headline of the article. Let me expand that for you. Is lower income workers who are not exclusively teleworking are less likely to be satisfied with safety measures. Okay. It's not a huge difference, but you can see that the lower income right here, the net satisfaction is 78, upper income 87, middle income 80, and I think we should acknowledge that even a point difference here is probably, we're talking about millions of people, in this country. And remember what I was saying about, the impact of real wages and whatnot. People in the upper income who are likely, blue collar workers and whatnot, they are more satisfied than lower income in terms of being protected for coronavirus. Of course they are. Of course they are. Because a lot of them have to go out and meet the public, right? And therefore, when we talk about the risk reward calculation, we have to understand, the price of the maximum risk. Oh boy, I'm trying. You know what? I tried to find a highlighter app for Firefox, but it's not really. It's not. It didn't work. So what are you gonna do? Has gone up. So here's the current situation. Real wages, as you saw, hasn't gone up for the vast majority of people for a long time. And when you think about the risk reward calculation, so the reward has been stagnant for years, and then um, especially due to the pandemic, right? The price of your maximum risk has gone up substantially. You saw in the news, right? There's been a lot of people who have suffered from the pandemic. I'm not going to get into the whole details about it, but here, there was another article. Sorry. Like I said, I was wanting to prepare some other stuff, but anyways, you saw in this article that yeah, lower income, you know, um, people are suffering, and I really want to talk about this. Um, Now there was another chart. I'm sorry, I can't find the link right now, but there was another chart that I wanted to bring up, which is if you take this chart of real wages and you break it down by education level, right? High school, some college, master's degree, advanced degree, and all this kind of stuff, right? The situation for retail workers and other jobs that are typically lower wage, requiring less education, are in a very, very bad situation. Sorry, I wish I could bring the chart up, but I don't want to go digging around for it right now while I'm doing the stream. Um, and what you'll see is that, in fact, for people who have only a high school degree or only some college, right? The curve that you see here uh, starts at a certain level and then just keeps going down, keeps going down, 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 down. Okay, so some people were able to experience some increases in wages and stuff, but for people with more limited education levels, all they've done is go downhill. Okay, all they have done is go downhill, right? And so let's do a quick sum up of uh, what we've been saying so far, and then we'll get into the excuse me, the final policy recommendation, and of what an economist would say about this whole thing. You know, um, real wages have been going down for decades. It's been even worse for people with more limited education, right? And then we got hit with the double whammy of the lockdown and the pandemic. And I think the consequences for um, for the economy is going to be, I mean, it's obviously a major impact, but also it's going to resonate for years, I think. But what would an economist say about a labor shortage, especially given the facts that we have reviewed so far? Again, I don't think anyone can dispute the fact that real wages have been stagnant. I don't think anyone's going to dispute that a pandemic makes it harder to go back to work, especially if you're interacting with lots of people. Okay, those are simple facts. And so when you look at from the perspective of a typical worker who are making common sense risk reward calculations, right? This is a very, very trying, challenging time for them. Okay, I think we need to at least acknowledge that, have some sympathy, you know. instead of saying labor shortage and some sort of abstract, these kinds of tough choices are being made by millions of people across this country, you know. And what would an economist say about this labor shortage? Well, I mean, in a certain way, the term labor shortage doesn't really make sense to an economist. Yeah, I mean, we use that term and all this kind of stuff, but you know, we look at, we understand a market, even a labor market, as a dynamic thing. There is a constant interaction between supply and demand. Okay, so let's look at uh, another article. You know, you know. Okay, so first let me bring that up on the chart, and I'm gonna hide this so that you can at least you can better see the. But this article was written by Sarah Estelle. She's got a PhD. She's associate professor of economics at Hope College and an adjunct scholar with the McKinnock Center for Public Policy in Midland, Michigan. Okay, so I did obviously read through this article, and she does have a certain political slant. So hard to, I mean, it's so hard to get away from this in the media because it seems like, you need to have that kind of, some kind of twist or gimmick to get published or something. Um, so she's placing a lot of blame on the government interference in the market, taking somewhat of a libertarian uh, view of this. But uh, no economist would really dispute her overall point. Um, where she's talking about the fact that the market can solve America's labor shortage if Washington will let it. Okay, so let me just bring that. Okay, so as a good economist should, right? She's pointing out that there is a solution, um, a free market solution in our capitalist society for what's termed a labor shortage. Okay, what would an economist say when you tell him there's a shortage of a resource? Well, the market will reach equilibrium because prices will go up. That's how it works. That is how capitalism works, right? That is how capitalism works. If the supply for something goes down, then the price will increase to balance out demand and supply. That's the workings of a free market economy. Okay. And of course, the labor market, we have all kinds of regulations and whatnot, but primarily that action is how our economy works, right? People, that is workers, are trading their time and labor for a salary. And it's just like every other market, right? Demand and supply will be regulated by price signals. And when we're talking about price signals, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about this. Okay. We're talking about wages, and especially real wages, right? So let's go back to this article. The market can solve America's labor shortage. And she's absolutely right about this, right? You know, so that's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit bemused when people talk about a labor shortage as if it's a thing, as if it's something that you can pick up like a cat. Um, a shortage is a temporary uh, mispricing between supply and demand, right? Meaning the prices will adjust to equalize the market, create a market equilibrium, as economists say, right? And so, looking at her remarks, right? Okay, I'm gonna have to keep my mouse selected. Labor markets operate just like any other market. Prices or wages, in this case, adjust automatically based on supply and demand, which works to reduce the shortage. Why? Because prices, when not artificially restricted by governments, provide both valuable information on the relative scarcity of resources and the incentives to employ those resources. Okay, so um, talking further, um, this basic economic law means that there is a simple solution to the problem of businesses not being able to find enough workers. They can increase wages. Either that or provide other forms of remuneration, such as more flexibility, paid leave, or other benefits valued by employees. Okay, so basically what she's saying is, you know, well, she's not making reference to this long-term decline in real wages, but we're setting the table about the situation for retail workers, and saying, okay, her remarks are a reflection that the reward side has been stagnant for years. Okay, and so let's move on to the next statement, because I think this is also very revealing, and I want to talk about this. It says, okay, let me first bring up the page here. So why don't businesses instantly start paying higher wages? Some argue that wages are historically low, which it kind of is, and only slowly growing while corporate profits are high and business should be able to afford the cost. But that's too simplistic. The U.S. actually has seen solid wage growth. That's debatable. And corporate profits do not capture the financial well-being of small businesses. That's actually true. On the other hand, you know what? What's happening with small businesses in terms of the wage situation. A lot of positions at small businesses are lower paying by their nature, right? Corporate jobs typically have more remuneration, right? And so, what's happening with the welfare of workers in small businesses is, tied to the welfare of workers in general, right? The wage growth or lack thereof, you know, of workers. And so she's saying, there's been, an increase, a solid increase in real wages. Well, that depends on where you set the marker. If you're starting from 1995, yeah, it's been a steady increase, right? But if you go back to 1972, we're still behind, right? So the statement about solid wage growth is true in the near term past, but long term that's a questionable statement, and you see that in this data right here, right? So that's why I said there's some political tones that are here, but she's making a very good point about the solution. Excuse me. Well, the solution that would be proposed by any economist, which is, if you can't attract workers, you have to increase your wages. Now, there has been talk in other articles and in the news about how businesses have attempted to give sign-up bonuses and create other incentives and all that. But my problem with all of those is that workers know it's a bonus. It's not guaranteed and it's long term. So when we go back to the whole issue about risk reward calculation, right? They're going to look at that bonus and say, okay, that's a temporary thing. So it doesn't shift the equation all that much. It simply can't. It's simple mathematics, right? The perceived benefits versus the perceived risk. and the workers are looking at that bonus and saying, and that's why, you know, um, uh, it seems that many businesses are still having difficulty attracting workers. Now, what does all of this mean long term for the economy and for the labor market? Well, in the short term, there is a very real solution to this. Businesses need to increase wages to attract more workers. Now, I know there's been talk and articles in the media about how I doubled my hourly rate, et cetera, et cetera. And I increased rate, and nothing happened. Well, there's probably other factors involved in that particular business, right? Maybe it was particularly a high risk business. There are certain businesses that people, workers are going to look at that and say, okay, yeah, you're paying a lot. That's awesome. And I'd love to take it. But you know what? It still makes me nervous about the pandemic and the risk. So, here in this article, in the Vox article, um, it talks about Krista, who was working as a dog bather at Texas PetSmart, and she felt really unsafe. Right, the doors to the grooming salon were kept closed at all times to keep dog hair and barking noise inside. The room was essentially a quote steel tube where you're in there with up to 8 people at a time. My coworkers would be in there talking, eating, singing, just whatever, without their mask on. And I was just kind of stuck in there for them. For this, Krista made $11 an hour. Okay, let me bring that up. For being stuck in a steel tube, how would you feel in the pandemic when you're surrounded by people who are not wearing a mask and they were singing and eating, and for that she was paid $11 an hour. Okay. Now, of course, there's a typical statement from the corporation where they said, we emphasize the safety, et cetera, et cetera. But that doesn't necessarily make you feel good. Um, you know, okay. So now, this is the key thing. Look at what she says right here. Okay. Krista, for her part, left her job in January, and she says, quote, I was weighing the risk of, do I potentially bring COVID home to myself and my family for what amounts to basically poverty wages? They went back to a previous job at another grooming salon where the work is not customer facing at all, they said. I don't have to interact face to face with people, which is a huge relief after some of the attitudes and tantrums. But listen to what she said. In the first part, I was weighing the risk of, do I potentially bring COVID home to myself and my family for what amounts to basically poverty wages. Okay. Now, isn't that basically along the lines of everything that we're talking about? And when she's talking about poverty wages, this is a trend that has been going on for decades. Okay, where people have felt like they're stuck. And now with the pandemic, the risk side of the equation has gone up dramatically, right? And so what did she do? She went to another business. It's a similar job, but it's a different business, right? And so when you hear talk about, that a particular business raised their hourly rate, and we still can't attract people, it might be a situation like this, like what you see in this article. Right here, right? And this hints at two things that's going on. The risk reward calculation for workers in this economy with the pandemic has shifted for many people. The pandemic may have finally tipped them over the edge in saying it's simply not worth the reward, right? It's not worth it anymore for me to work here and put my family at risk, right? And the second part of what she did, which is to say, I am now shifting to a different type of work, is what I mean when we think about the longer term impact of COVID-19, right? We may be seeing a significant realignment of people and work in this country because that basic risk reward calculation has shifted for so many of them. That's it. Okay. So in the near term, these supply and demand problems, are going to ease, and inflation will eventually subside. The labor shortage, I'm going to put that in quotes because it's a dynamic situation, right? A shortage in a free market economy is a temporary situation, right? Unless we're talking about straight out monopoly, that's a different situation. But in a primarily free market, a labor shortage is a temporary condition that will be resolved by a shift in price signals, okay, in this case wages. And then the larger implication of what's happening with the economy is that people may simply be looking for a different type of work. Says, I've had it with this. The pandemic has pushed me over the edge, but things have been bad for a long time. And I've read lots of comments in the media, actual quotes from workers who are saying, I'm reassessing my life goals. I'm reassessing my career. I'm thinking about whether there's a better place for me, And as those calculations are being deliberated in the economy, is it any wonder that there's this kind of feeling that workers are reluctant to come to work? They're not reluctant to come to work. They are recalculating their risk reward for their career. They're making rational choices, or they're trying their best to make a common sense evaluation of which way to go, right? So, it's not that they're sitting on their hands and saying, I don't want to work. People want to work because they got to make a living. But they're saying, what is the better path for me here, right? Now, I do want to say something else, which is a lead up to another session. I want to talk about labor in the U.S. economy, especially the gig economy, because there's so much more to talk about this, in terms of what's happening with workers, what's happening with the labor supply, what's happening with the long-term trends in terms of what it means to work in this economy. And it's that, okay, let me bring up this chart again. Because there has been such a long-term stagnation, and I know from here to here it's starting to go up a little bit, but again, measuring from 1973 and whatnot. And when you look, like I said, when you look at the economy for people with more limited education, high school and possibly a little bit of college, it's all been downhill. It's all been downhill. And there's been things like, businesses that are popping up like, like Uber, and food delivery. I mean, I'm talking about the the more recent developments like Uber Eats and that kind of stuff, where the business model is dependent on these low wages, right? And remember, we're talking about the Fed president's comments about how some businesses are getting emotional about this labor shortage. What I believe what's really happening is that some of the businesses out there have developed around business models that require low wages, right? That's how they stay in business. That's how they're competing. They can talk about delivery, the goods and services and customer service, but fundamentally, their competitive advantage in the market is that they pay very, very low compensation, right? And that's how they're able to succeed. And if market forces are now finally causing them to lift up their compensation, that's not simply a matter for them of paying higher wages. It's a matter of survival of their business, right? And no wonder they're starting to get emotional, right? No wonder it's starting to get emotional. So I know that was a lot, but I was trying to kind of, give a broader perspective on what's been happening with wages and labor in this country and connect that with what's happening with the pandemic and the lockdown, right? So things have been bad for a while, and people are maybe starting to say, many of them are starting to say that, you know, um, that, sorry, I got some weird notification in this thing, but are starting to say that maybe this is enough now. And the friction that we're seeing in the labor market, workers returning back to the worker, may not be, it would be too simplistic to describe it, I think, as saying a reluctance to go back to work. It's because there are people out there with families who are having to make very serious choices about which way they go, where do they work, how do I deal with the challenges of the pandemic that is still present, you know, and is it a good time for me to reassess my career, right? And so I hope that places the whole situation in better context. You know, let's not go about demonizing other people. Let's not, you know, create caricatures of each other. Whether it's businesses that are out there that are struggling with trying to find workers, whether it's workers who are trying to, navigate this new workplace environment. It's hard on everybody. And I think we are going through a very difficult transition, and it's going to take time for this to work its way out, right? Because the typical economist solution of reaching price equilibrium um, doesn't. I mean, we're typically talking about times when there isn't a global pandemic. A global pandemic obviously complicates the equation. So the short-term economist solution of adjusting the price between labor and supply, that's going to take longer than expected, right? And then there's some real question about whether workers millions of them, are making reassessments about their career path, whether even if they stay in a particular field, they may be looking for a somewhat different work environment. Okay. So, yeah, I know that was a lot. And the truth is, there's still much, much more to be said about the situation um, here in this country. But I don't want this stream to go on for 3 hours, So, anyways, uh, why don't you know? I typically stream Wednesday night and Sunday afternoons, Pacific Standard Time. I'm here in California. Um, And there may be times where I do extra streams just because there's so much going on, and I want to help clarify a lot of the the kind of the red alert alarm news that are being put out there by the mass media. So that was it. So I hope you found that helpful. You know, and I'll see you in the next stream.